The Wild West has long been romanticized, etched into our imaginations with images of rugged cowboys, daring outlaws, and vast, untamed landscapes. But beneath the veneer of legend lies a reality far stranger and more gripping than the myths we've been told. It's a place where the unexpected lurked around every corner, where survival was as much about grit as it was about luck, and where the old rules didn't always apply. Today, we dive deep into the lesser-known, yet profoundly fascinating aspects of life in the Old West. Buckle up, because these aren't just the stories of gunslingers and cattle drives you've come to expect. These are tales that defy expectations, challenge what you thought you knew, and offer a glimpse into a world both familiar and utterly alien. Picture yourself traveling westward in the mid-1800s. The allure of new beginnings and fortune pushes you forward, yet the land is hostile and unwelcoming. Every sunrise is both a promise of hope and a reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the horizon. You may have grown up reading the works of Louis L'Amour or fantasized about life on the Oregon Trail, but the reality of frontier life was far less romantic and infinitely more brutal.
Welcome to 3 Minutes of History.
The Wild
I'm your
West
future
was a
history teacher,
paradox,
Chris
a land of
Oxenford,
freedom and
let's get
lawlessness,
started.
prosperity
March
and
20
hardship. And for every tall tale told around a campfire, there were untold truths, stranger than fiction, waiting in the shadows. Take the Battle of Glorieta Pass, for instance. Mention the Civil War, and most people's minds immediately conjure images of Gettysburg, Antietam, or Sherman's fiery march to the sea. But few know that a critical skirmish occurred not on the eastern battlefields, but in the rugged terrain of New Mexico. It was March 1862, and while most of the country was embroiled in bloody battles far to the east, the Union and Confederacy understood the importance of controlling the West. New Mexico was more than just a wild expanse. It was a gateway to riches, specifically, the mineral wealth of the Rocky Mountains and the strategic path to the Pacific coast. Victory here could shape the future of America's westward expansion, determining whether the Confederacy could push toward California, gaining access to vital seaports and trade routes. The Battle of Glorieta Pass wasn't a grand clash of armies but a gritty, desperate fight involving just 2,500 soldiers. Early on, the Confederates, led by Texas regiments, appeared to have the upper hand, delivering a crushing blow to a Union detachment. But the tides of war are fickle. A band of Union volunteers from New Mexico, in a bold and daring move, climbed the cliffs of Glorieta Mesa, outflanking the Texans. From this elevated position, they rained destruction on their enemy below.
And were first
It was
to
a brutal,
abandon several
bloody
defensive
encounter,
positions.
and while it didn't capture the headlines like
However,
Gettysburg or
while Scurry was
Vicksburg,
driving
the
back
Union's victory here was crucial. Had the Texans succeeded, the Confederacy could have extended its reach across the West, perhaps even altering the course of the war. Imagine, if you will, Confederate troops marching into Arizona, laying claim to Mexico, and establishing strongholds on the Pacific coast. The world we know today might have been vastly different. And yet, the strange tales of the West aren't confined to battlefields. The land itself seemed to breed the bizarre and the unexplainable. In the small frontier town of Lodi, California, in 1896, the unimaginable happened. A Civil War veteran and local journalist named H.G. Shaw claimed that he had encountered beings not of this world. It was an ordinary day when Shaw and a companion reportedly crossed paths with creatures over 7 feet tall, with slim, elongated bodies and hands without nails. Their feet, Shaw wrote, resembled those of monkeys, long, agile, and unnervingly alien. According to Shaw, these beings had come from Mars, their mission simple yet chilling. They were here to collect a human specimen. In a time when the term UFO didn't exist, and when modern technology was still in its infancy, Shaw's account was met with both intrigue and skepticism. But it wasn't an isolated incident. Just a year later, in Aurora, Texas, a cigar-shaped flying object reportedly exploded over the town. Witnesses described seeing strange lights in the sky, and while skeptics chalked it up to a meteorite, whispers of an extraterrestrial presence persisted for years. These were the kinds of stories that, like the legends of outlaws and gunfighters, were passed down through generations, blurring the line between fact and folklore. But if you thought aliens were the strangest part of Old West lore, think again. Long before settlers made their way across the plains, the native Paiute people spoke of an ancient race of giants, red-haired, cannibalistic giants known as the Siteka. These fearsome beings were said to have roamed the Nevada desert, terrorizing the local tribes. The Paiute believed that these giants, with their fiery hair and insatiable hunger for human flesh, once ruled the region. Their presence was so feared that the Paiute eventually waged war against them, driving the giants into a cave, where they set fires to suffocate them, wiping out the cannibalistic tribe once and for all. And yet, tales of the Siteka have persisted. In the early 20th century, guano miners exploring Lovelock Cave in Nevada discovered large skeletal remains, reigniting the legends of the red-haired giants. While scientists quickly dismissed the bones as belonging to native humans, the stories refused to die. To this day, some believe that the Siteka were more than just myth, that they were a race of beings lost to time, their remains scattered across the deserts of the West, waiting to be rediscovered. The Wild West wasn't just a land of outlaws and pioneers. It was a place where the boundaries of reality seemed to blur. From ghost towns haunted by the memories of those who perished in search of fortune to remote outposts where isolation bred fear and superstition, the Old West was a crucible of the strange and the unexplained. And as settlers pushed further into the unknown, they encountered things that defied logic, events that even today leave us questioning what really happened out there, beyond the reach of civilization. As you sit here, reading this, perhaps you can feel the weight of history pressing in, the stories of forgotten battles, unexplained sightings, and ancient legends that continue to linger, just beneath the surface of the Wild West we thought we knew. So the next time you watch a classic Western or read about the adventures of cowboys and outlaws, remember this: the true history of the Old West is far stranger, more complex, and infinitely more fascinating than any Hollywood script. And while some of its mysteries may remain unsolved, they continue to captivate our imaginations, drawing us back to a time when the world was wilder, and anything, absolutely anything, was possible. Despite the Oregon government's decision to outlaw slavery in 1844, Peter Bernett, one of the founding fathers, introduced a chilling provision known as the Lash Law. This law declared that while slavery would not be permitted, freed black people were not welcome in Oregon either. Any black person who remained in the state after their period of emancipation could be publicly whipped, up to 39 lashes every 6 months, until they left Oregon entirely. This grotesque law, which was intended to create a white utopia, was eventually repealed, but it left a dark stain on Oregon's early history. It serves as a stark reminder of the deep-rooted racism that persisted even in areas of the country that opposed slavery. The history of the West is often thought of as a place of freedom and opportunity, where settlers came to forge new lives. But as the tale of Oregon's early laws shows, this freedom was often only available to a select few, and the systemic oppression of people of color was deeply embedded in the fabric of these new territories. For many, the dream of the West was a nightmare of persecution and violence, a place where laws were made and enforced by those in power to maintain the status quo of white supremacy. This is not the story most people think of when they imagine the Wild West, but it is a vital part of its history. The same can be said of the many other struggles that took place on the frontier, where the harsh realities of life often clashed with the romanticized notions of freedom and independence. Take, for instance, the story of Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins and her people, the Northern PUD. For centuries, the Paiute had lived in what is now Nevada, long before white settlers arrived. According to tribal legend, the Paiute once waged war against a tribe of red-haired giants, known as the Siteka, who were said to be cannibals. These giants terrorized the Paiute people, hunting and eating them, until the tribe was able to trap the Siteka in a cave and set it on fire, killing them all. Hopkins, a tribal activist and archivist, recounted this legend in her writings, passed down by Paiute elders for generations. She claimed that her family even possessed a mourning dress, trimmed with reddish hair said to belong to the Siteka. While modern historians and folklorists believe the Siteka were likely not giants but simply a rival tribe with a genetic predisposition for red hair, the legend remains a significant part of Paiute culture. To this day, the story is told as a reminder of the struggles the Paiute people faced in their fight for survival against enemies both human and supernatural. The line between myth and reality is often blurred in the stories of the West. Whether it's tales of giants or the brutal violence of feuding families, the Wild West was a place where life could be unpredictable, dangerous, and often terrifying. One of the most infamous feuds in Western history was the conflict between the Sutton and Taylor families of Texas, a rivalry that became so violent it rivaled the more well-known Hatfield and McCoy feud along the Kentucky-West Virginia border. The sudden Taylor feud began in the aftermath of the Civil War, as tensions simmered in a Texas still reeling from the Confederacy's defeat. In 1866, Buck Taylor shot and killed a Southern ally, sparking a cycle of revenge that would engulf DeWitt County for nearly a decade. The feud
Over the next 2
escalated
days,
in
the Union and
1868
Confederate
when Taylor
armies were
himself was
heavily
killed,
reinforced.
and members of
On
both
the morning
families
of
began to take sides, leading to a string of violent confrontations. The Suttons, aligned with the Texas State Police and Reconstruction Forces, sought to eradicate the Taylor faction, who remained loyal to Southern sympathies. The violence spiraled out of control, with both sides enlisting allies and spreading fear throughout the county. Those who refused to choose sides risked being killed, while those who did often found themselves in the crossfire. By 1874, the violence had reached such a fever pitch that the Texas Rangers were called in to restore order. But by that point, many of the most aggressive participants on both sides had already been killed.
Throughout the afternoon, there was intense fighting
Over the
between
next
the two
few
forces.
years, the feud slowly burned out, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. By the time the dust settled, more than 30 people had been killed, and the courts spent decades trying to untangle the legal ramifications of the feud. In many ways, the Sutton-Taylor feud was emblematic of the broader struggles of the post-Civil War South, where old loyalties and new laws clashed in violent and often deadly
and the commander
ways.
of the Union Army,
It was a time of great upheaval, as the social order was reshaped in the wake of the war,
At about 11
and the West
a.m., the
became
two
a
armies,
battleground for those
1,100
looking to either
Confederates
rebuild or
and
hold on to the
900
past.
Union soldiers
Amid this
collided.
chaos, slavery continued to be a contentious issue. While the Civil War had settled the question of slavery in the South, the newly formed states in the West were still grappling with the issue. In Oregon, the state had outlawed slavery in 1844, but as we've seen, its early leaders implemented harsh and racist policies to ensure that black people, whether enslaved or free, would not settle in the state. This was not an isolated incident. Across the West, the legacy of slavery and racism cast a long shadow. In California, for example, slavery was technically illegal, but many Southern settlers brought enslaved people with them, and local laws were often ignored or manipulated to allow the practice to continue. The question of slavery's role in the West was one of the many tensions that would ultimately lead to the Civil War and shape the future of the region. As the 19th century progressed and the West became more settled, these tensions continued to simmer. The romantic image of the cowboy, the Lone Ranger riding the open range, is one that has captivated the American imagination for generations. But the reality of life in the West was far more complex. For many, it was a place of struggle and hardship, where survival often depended on your ability to adapt to a harsh and unforgiving environment. This was particularly true for people of color in the West, who faced not only the challenges of the frontier but also the systemic racism that permeated American society. From the exclusionary laws in Oregon to the forced relocation of Native American tribes, the West was not a land of equal opportunity for all. It was a place where the same struggles for freedom and justice that defined the rest of the country played out in unique and often brutal ways. And yet, despite these challenges, the West also became a place of great cultural diversity. People from all over the world came to the West in search of new opportunities, bringing with them their own traditions, languages, and customs. This melting pot of cultures would go on to shape the region in ways that are still evident today. The history of the West is one of contradictions. It is a place where myths and legends coexist with brutal realities, where the promise of freedom often came with a heavy price. And it is a place where the stories of giants, feuds, and pioneers continue to captivate our imaginations, offering us a glimpse into a time when anything seemed possible and the future was as wide open as the frontier itself. The history of the American West is rife with myths and legends, but some of the most fascinating and lesser-known stories stem from the brutal realities of life on the frontier, where the law was often harsh and opportunity came at a steep price. One of the most troubling figures in this narrative is Peter Bernett, whose infamous Lash Law serves as a chilling reminder of the deep-seated racism that persisted even in territories that opposed slavery. Bernett, who played a pivotal role in shaping Oregon's early statehood, crafted a bill that made it illegal for freed black people to live in the state. Section 6 of Burnett's bill mandated that any freed slaves who were brought to Oregon had to leave immediately, and if they didn't, they would be subjected to public whipping, a punishment of no less than 20 lashes and up to 39. Burnett's fear was that former slaves would harbor resentment toward the white settlers, and this irrational concern fueled his determination to keep Oregon whites only. While it remains unclear whether any freed slaves were ever subjected to this horrific punishment, the law effectively banished black people from settling in Oregon. Even more disturbingly, this exclusionary law stayed on the books until 1926, a testament to how deeply ingrained racist policies were in the fabric of the state. As this dark chapter of Oregon's history unfolded, other bizarre and fascinating events were playing out across the American frontier. One of the most curious episodes in the West's storied past involves the use of camels. Before the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, westward expansion posed logistical challenges, and horses, while a staple of frontier life, had their limits. Enter the camel, a creature that had evolved over millennia to survive the harshest conditions in desert environments. In the mid-19th century, camels were seen as a potential solution for traversing the arid landscapes of the American West. In the 1840s and 1850s, supply trains began experimenting with camels, using them to transport goods over shorter distances across various regions, from Texas to Washington. By the late 1850s, Edward Fitzgerald Beale, an explorer and military officer, undertook an ambitious journey, leading a group of camels on a 1,200-mile trek from the Midwest to California, just north of Los Angeles. This trek sparked excitement among pioneers, who saw the potential of using camels for long journeys across the vast and rugged terrain. Henry Wayne, a Confederate major, optimistically predicted that Americans would not only manage camels as well as Arabs but would do so with greater humanity and intelligence. Despite the era's underlying racism, Wayne's statement reflected the hope that camels could revolutionize transportation in the West. In 1857, the U.S. government purchased hundreds of camels, which were put to use in Texas. However, with the onset of the Civil War, the government's plans for the camels were disrupted, and Confederate forces in Texas seized the animals, repurposing them for military use. These camels, dubbed the Camel Corps, were used to carry goods, deliver mail, and support the Confederate war effort. One of the more famous camels, Old Douglas, served with the 43rd Mississippi Infantry and met a tragic end during the siege of Vicksburg. Despite this, the Camel Corps ultimately proved to be an impractical endeavor, and as the war ended and the frontier settled, the remaining camels were left to wander the wilds of the West. One of these wild camels became known as the Red Ghost, a legendary creature that terrorized frontier towns. According to local lore, the Red Ghost trampled a woman to death, and over time, tall tales of its exploits grew more and more fantastical. But by the turn of the century, the last of the wild camels had died off, and the memory of the Camel Corps faded into obscurity. The West's wild and untamed nature gave rise to many such legends, none more enduring than the tales of lost mines and hidden treasures. Gold and silver rushes had lured countless men westward, and while the vast majority of these fortune seekers failed miserably, a few struck it rich. Their success sparked dreams in others that riches were just around the corner, and stories of hidden gold spread like wildfire. These legends, of course, were often fabrications or exaggerations, but that didn't stop desperate miners from believing that somewhere out there, a fortune awaited them. One of the most enduring of these legends is the tale of the Lost Dutchman's Mine. Located somewhere in Arizona's Superstition Mountains, the mine was rumored to hold vast quantities of gold, but its exact location has remained a mystery for over a century. Many have searched for it, and some have even died in their quest to find the elusive treasure. Despite the lack of evidence that the mine even exists, the legend continues to captivate treasure hunters to this day, serving as a reminder of the lengths people will go to in pursuit of wealth. The West was a place where opportunity and danger went hand in hand, where myths and reality often blurred together. While some, like Peter Bernett, used their power to uphold racist policies and restrict the freedoms of others, others sought to push the boundaries of what was possible, whether by introducing camels to the frontier or chasing after legendary fortunes. The stories that have emerged from this time are as diverse as the people who lived them, filled with moments of triumph, tragedy, and mystery. In the end, the Wild West was not just a place of gunslingers and cowboys. It was a land where the unimaginable became real and where legends were born. Whether through the brutal enforcement of exclusionary laws, the introduction of foreign animals to American soil, or the endless search for hidden gold, the West continues to fascinate us, offering a glimpse into a world where the line between myth and reality was often razor thin. The legacy of that era is one of resilience, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of dreams, no matter how far-fetched they may seem. In the rugged towns of the American frontier, men often found themselves making a living in unconventional ways, and one of the most infamous professions was that of the gambler. These professional card players would move from town to town, earning their keep through high-stakes games. However, not all of them relied on skill alone. Many resorted to cheating, employing slick tricks and underhanded tactics to outsmart the unsuspecting locals who dared to sit across from them at the table.
You'd be hard-pressed to find
Once
a
they
gang
made
of
a
outlaws
tidy
playing
profit,
poker,
these shady
drunk
characters
lawmen
would vanish,
reveling in their
skipping
day's
town
work of
before
rounding
anyone
up
caught
bad
on to their
guys.
schemes.
Rather,
In 19th century
saloons were a
California,
socializing focal
professional
point at the
gambling
center
was
of a
nearly a
boomtown,
way of life,
filled with
drawing
mostly
men from all
cooperation
over the
and
country to
compassion
test their
amongst patrons.
fortunes. The allure of
also
easy
served as
money was
places-
too great to resist, and the card tables became hubs for these nomadic gamblers. California's bustling frontier towns quickly turned into destinations for anyone looking to make a quick buck,
More
and the
than
gambling
likely,
scene
you'd
became a
greet whomever
central
was sharing
aspect
the
of
space
life
at the
on the
moment in
western
time.
frontier.
The
But
regulars
gambling
included
wasn't the
cowboys
only
and
vice
ranchers
that held
looking
sway
to
over
strike
the
up
hearts
deals
of
with
men
fellow
in the Wild
cowmen.
West.
Travelers looking
Whiskey
for
was the other
companionship
great
or basic
companion to
conversation,
frontier life.
and
Whether
soldiers
to
or
celebrate a
laborers
win at the
looking to
card
wind
table or
down
drown
and
the
escape
sorrows of a
boredom
loss,
away from the job
whiskey
site.
was the go-to drink.
After a
However,
few
the whiskey
salutation-
that flowed in the saloons of the Old West was a far cry from the refined liquors of today. These were concoctions with names as wild as the land itself, names like 40 Rods, Tarantula Juice, Lightning, and others that sounded exotic but held dark secrets in every
Ingredients.
bottle.
It was
These
just
drinks
alcohol,
were more than just
and
strong,
mostly
they
resembled
were
the
often
whiskey
downright
enjoyed
dangerous.
in modern times.
Many were laced with toxic
However,
ingredients,
the name
including strychnine, turpentine, and even tobacco oil. Some of these whiskeys
smaller
were
saloons of the
little
tent
more
and
than
lean-to
poisonous
variety
brews,
always
potent
offered
enough
cheap
to
beer
knock
and
out
whiskey,
even the most
as
seasoned
they knew their
drinkers after
clientele
just a few
would come
sips.
from places that
In
were
fact,
also rough
it
around
wasn't
the edges.
uncommon for men to need a second shot
Cowboys,
just to help them
miners, and
forget the
travelers
taste of the
didn't
first.
have flexible income
After
or
a
much
few
cash
rounds,
to begin
many
with.
would slip into
So
a
a few
deep,
cents for a shot
chemically
glass
induced
or
stupor,
pint of beer
only to wake
was
up the
to be
next day
expected.
and start all over again.
The prices
This
would go
situation
up
shouldn't come as too much of a shock when you consider the context. The distances between frontier towns were vast, and saloons were often isolated outposts in a lawless land. With inconsistent supply chains and a lack of any real food or drink regulations, saloon keepers had to get creative with what they served. There were no rules to dictate what should and shouldn't go into a bottle of whiskey, so they made do with whatever they had on hand. As men ventured from town to town, gambling and drinking became the cornerstones of social life on the frontier. Whether through luck at the card table or the burn of a strong shot of whiskey, these rough and tumble
Waved hello to
experiences
the wagon
defined
party
much of what it
scouts,
meant to live in the
traded for
untamed
hides with the
West.
cowboys,
And while the
and bought
romantic
the
image
poor
of the
19-year-old
gambler and the
miner
saloon
drink
might
of his
still
own,
captivate our
you
imaginations
fulfilled
today,
most of the
the
early
reality
saloon
was often far
experiences
grittier
all
and more
in one
dangerous
night.
than we might like to believe.
You
On
probably
that note,
wondered where
we
the
wrap up today's episode. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the lesser-known aspects of life in the Wild West. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to catch our next update. Until then, stay curious and remember, the truth of the Old West is stranger than any fiction.